Hello. In this section, we're going to talk about the French Revolution and political thought. In particular, we're going to be talking about nationalism and liberalism. And a way to kind of think about this, I think, is to look at a quote from a British general who was key to the French defeat in the Napoleonic Wars, right? So after Napoleon took power, there was all these wars between France and various countries in Europe. And the guy who defeated Napoleon in the final battle at Waterloo, that ended Napoleon's rule, basically, was a man named Arthur Wesley, the Duke of Wellington. And this is how Arthur Wesley, the Duke of Wellington, described his army. Our army is composed of the scum of the earth, the mere scum of the earth. Now, can you imagine an American general saying something like that today? It would seem strange, right? We believe that the soldiers are people to be respected, to be honored because of their sacrifice for the country. But that's actually a relatively recent understanding of how the common soldier should be treated. Usually there was respect for nobility, for officers, but not for the common average everyday people because they were seen as fighting just because they had nothing else to do. Why did you join the army? Well, because you probably owed money or you just didn't have a chance of doing anything else, so that's why you joined. That was the common view. I'm not saying that's how the way things were. But in Chinese history, there was a saying, it does not take good iron to make a nail, nor does it take a good man to make a soldier. So it's kind of curious that we have this idea of honoring and respecting soldiers, including just your lower-ranking soldiers, just a private we respect as a veteran who served the country. Well, why is that? A major impact, a major reason for that is the French Revolution and the armies raised by the revolutionary government. The French practiced what's called mass conscription, right? Conscription's like the draft. They said to young men, it is your duty to fight for France, and you're going to go fight for France. And it was understood that this was your patriotic duty that you did, not for a king, but for the nation of which you were a part. I'm French. As a Frenchman, I have a duty to serve my country. It's important to note that in the French Constitution, the Declaration of Rights of Man and the Citizen, there were also duties such as being a soldier. And when it becomes the duty of every man, in a sense, as a Frenchman, a French national, a member of the nation, when it becomes their duty to be a soldier, being a soldier means changes. Being a soldier now is an honorable thing because you're fighting not for a king's private wars, but for the wars of a nation. You are a defender of the country who is sacrificing yourself to protect the nation. You're doing your duty. So what happens is the French, because they adopt the system, they are able to raise gigantic armies of very enthusiastic, patriotic soldiers. And they're able, in many cases, to defeat the professional armies of other European countries. Even though, in a sense, their soldiers aren't as good, they're not as trained, they're extraordinarily fervent, patriotic, and willing to sacrifice themselves for victory. So there's a transformation in what it means to be a soldier, from basically being almost like a mercenary to being a patriotic defender of the country, doing your duty. And this, of course, leads to the elevation of soldiers and respect for them because they are seen as the righteous defenders of the nation. And what happens is when the French go out and conquer other places, that leads to similar developments, not simply in the terms of the armies that are formed, but in how people think of themselves. So this is a painting of Napoleon capturing Berlin, right, the capital of Prussia at this time, a country that will eventually become Germany. And the German people who lived here were horrified that they had been conquered by the French. And this helped emphasize their own national identity. How could we Germans be conquered by the French? And their answer was, because we Germans are divided. Right, the French are unified as a nation state, but we Germans are divided into many different states, and there were many different German states. I want to stress that. There was no unified Germany in this time period. There was Prussia, there was Bavaria, there were all these little German states that were not unified. So what happened is, what I think is really striking is, One thing that the Germans did when the French left was they actually established a university in Berlin with the express purpose of helping to unify all ethnic Germans into one country. And as a side note, for those of you who are history majors, the father of modern history, Leopold von Ranke, became a professor at this university and lived through this experience. So what I want to stress is that this identity, this kind of nationalism, this identification with the nation, doesn't just exist in France. It doesn't just lead to France having big armies. It leads to growing national identity in other countries. Why did we Germans lose? Because we're divided. We need to unify behind our country like the French. And this could be seen on not simply in intellectuals like university professors like von Ranke. This could be seen among just your average everyday people. So let me explain this painting. Right, this is a painting. France actually conquered Spain during this time period. This will be very important later on. It's important now, but also later. France will conquer Spain. And you can see that there's these French troops who were coming down a Spanish road. And the Spanish people, civilians, not soldiers, come out and actually attack the French. And you can see there were men. They knew the French were coming. They were hiding up here with guns on the roofs so that when the French soldiers came down, they could shoot them. And these guys run out of the houses and attack the French troops. You can even see a woman is involved here. And this form of warfare, and I'm not going to pronounce this correctly, guerrilla warfare. Americans, we tend to read this, at least native English-speaking Americans tend to read this as guerrilla warfare. Do you think guerrillas like the big apes? But this actually is a Spanish word meaning little. Right? Little war. So guerrilla refers to little war. And what this means is not a war in which you have two uniformed armies fighting each other, but a war in which the people, typically not dressed as soldiers, attack the enemy's military wherever they are weak. So instead of having a stand-up battle, you're going to wear civilian clothes so the military thinks you're a civilian, they leave you alone. As soon as they let your guard down, you pick up your gun, you attack them. And basically this shows a kind of national feeling. The Spanish army was defeated. They surrendered to the French. But the Spanish people had so much loyalty and such a strong Spanish identity that said, we reject what our government did. We are going to fight back. Our government may have surrendered. The Spanish government may have surrendered, but the Spanish people, never. We will not surrender. We will fight back against the French. So the point here is you can see this growing national identity, and it's being developed in part through the French Revolution, right? First develops among the French, in a sense, but as they go out and conquer, that leads other non-French people to feel their own national identity more strongly. And we call this nationalism, right? We call this nationalism. What is nationalism, right? Nationalism is one of those things, you may not know it, but you're probably a nationalist. It seems so natural to us, we don't realize we're nationalists, but chances are you're a nationalist. What do I mean by that? What are the characteristics of nationalism? Why do I think you are a nationalist? First of all, in nationalism, there's an idea that every nation should have its own state. So there is a Japanese nation. They should have their own state. There shouldn't be two Japanese states because there's only one Japanese people. The Japanese people should have their own state. We call that a nation state. The nation of Japan, meaning the ethnic Japanese people, should have their own state. Now, that's a kind of ethnic nationalism. In the United States, we have civic nationalism because we're lots of different ethnic groups. But we basically would say, there's an American people. We share certain political, cultural ideas, certain ideas about freedom. That gives us a national identity, and we should therefore have just one state, right? The United States, one government. In Korea, there's a problem because you have one Korean people, but two states, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea in the north and the Republic of Korea in the south. And that's why both are dedicated to unification. Neither North Korea or South Korea says, they can just be on their own. Both of them want unification. They're not unified yet because, of course, each one thinks they should be doing the unifying. So that's one idea. One nation, one state. Not two states, one. One unified people, one unified state. Remember, that's why German people were saying they got defeated by France, because they were one nation, the German nation, divided into multiple different states like Prussia and Bavaria. In nationalism, sovereignty does not come from God. The right to rule does not come from God, typically. It comes from the people of a particular nation. What gives the Japanese state the right to rule? The people of Japan. What gives the American government the right to rule? Well, we're a democracy in which the people of the United States vote. And what's important about this is there's a kind of shift here from subjects to citizens. What do I mean by that? Basically, if you're a subject to a king, your job is to pay taxes and not cause trouble. Politics is something that belongs to the king, to the nobles, maybe to the church. You're just a subject. You just do what the king says. You don't cause trouble. You pay your taxes. A citizen, though, is very different. A citizen is someone who is actively engaged in politics and society. So think about the United States. Our government encourages us to vote. Society encourages us to vote. There's organizations that are dedicated to getting people to vote. Not to vote for a particular candidate, but just to get them to vote. Because we are citizens, we're expected to actively support our nation state. Now think about that. Which is going to be more powerful? A group of people who view their duty to the government as just paying taxes, not causing trouble, or people who think they're actively supposed to help? And I'll give you some examples of this, but think about the 7 Years' War, when the English were willing to, people were willing to pay money to buy bonds to support their government. It's the same kind of thing, right? They're going to be more powerful because they feel more loyalty. As citizens, they're going to actively be engaged in supporting their government in its war against France. And the idea here also is the nation state should be the primary loyalty of the people, right? The nation state comes before everything else. You're supposed to be more loyal to the nation state than your race, your religion. If you're an immigrant, you're supposed to be more loyal to your nation state than the country you came from. That's the idea of nationalism, right? Your primary loyalty is to the nation state before everything else. And I use this image to kind of help us think about this. So this is a Filipino flag, and these kids are on a carabao, which is kind of the Filipino national anthem. National symbol. It's seen as representing the Filipino people because it's of its strength and ability to endure difficulties. And what's interesting, a lot of times when you have this kind of image, you would just have a boy and a girl to represent the nation. But they've included a third boy, and the reason they did that, these are Christian Filipinos, and this is a Muslim Filipino. You can tell by the way he's dressed. So the idea here, and they're united by their common Filipino heritage, symbolized by the fact they're all in the same carabao, and they're holding the same flag. So the idea here is that, hey, you may be a Muslim, I might be a Christian, but you know what? We're all Filipinos, and we need to do what's best, not for Christians, not what's best for Muslims, but what's best for the whole people. And to kind of give you an example of this, at the Olympics, who do you cheer for? You cheer for people from your country. You don't necessarily, can you imagine someone going to the Olympics and have a sign that says, "Go Baptists," right? Or "Go Muslims," or "Go Hindus," or "Go Catholics"? Like, it'd be really weird, right? That's what I mean. You're probably a nationalist. But it's supposed to be your primary loyalty. Why? Well, whatever happens to it affects me. If I'm a member of a strong nation state, that makes me strong. If I'm a member of a weak nation state, I'm not as strong. And just to give you a concrete example, and I want to point out, my wife is from the Philippines. She's now an American citizen. But one thing that was interesting was her Filipino passport, if she tried to travel on it, was very difficult. Usually she needed a visa. She had to apply for another country. When she got an American passport, she didn't need to do that. There's many countries that as long as you have an American passport, you can just go get off the plane, just walk into the country, no problem. You don't need a visa or anything like that. That's because the United States is more powerful than the Philippines. So there's an understanding that you should be loyal to the nation state because your fate, what will happen to you, is directly connected to it. Right? What happens to the nation state affects me. And there's also this feeling of owing the nation state, right? You may hear Americans talk about this like, we owe our country. John F. Kennedy, don't ask can my country do for me, ask what I can do for my country. There's this idea that American people in the past have sacrificed to make our country strong and good. We should be willing to do the same thing. So this is a nationalistic idea. And I want to stress, this provides a lot of power because you've got all these people who feel that whatever happens to their country impacts them. And so they're willing to sacrifice for their country whenever it's in a difficulty. Let me give you a couple concrete examples to kind of prove my point. This is kind of an interesting ring. This is an iron ring, and you may notice it has the year 1914, and you may recognize the style of writing as German. And this is a German ring from 1914, made of iron. And what happened was the German government said, you know, we're in a war. This is during World War I. The German government says we're in a war. All Germans need to do their patriotic duty. We ask that you donate your gold wedding rings in service to the country. Right? We ask you to take off your wedding ring, like here's mine made of gold. Right? We ask that you send this to the government in service to your country. In recognition of your sacrifice, we will give you an iron wedding ring. Right? Recognition of your sacrifice, we will give you an iron wedding ring. Well, that's amazing. German people did this. German people were proud to do this. So the government got all this extra money they could use to fight the war, not by issuing a tax, by forcing people to give up their gold, but by asking them to. And German people said, yes, it's for the good of the country. We will sacrifice our gold for the good of the fatherland. And that gave the country, Germany, more money they could use to build up its army. To give you a more recent example that I think is really striking, in 1996, there was a financial crisis in Asia. And this led to a lot of problems, but I remember I was an undergraduate in 1996, and I had a lot of Korean friends, and it was terrible for them because the Korean economy went down. The Korean currency lost half its value. That meant that their tuition bill doubled because their Korean money was only worth half of what it had been previously. So it was a disaster for Korea. And in order to fix the situation, the Koreans had to borrow a bunch of money from the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. And because whenever you borrow money, right, that causes you problems because you got to pay interest on the money. And, you know, as long as someone owes you money, they can put restrictions on you. And Korea had all this restrictions on its economy because they owed money. So they wanted to pay this money back as soon as possible. And so what they did was the Korean government said, you know, please people, support the government, help us pay back the money by donating your gold. And this actually, I think this is fascinating. This is what's called E-Mart. It's kind of like Korean Walmart. And this right here says, basically, donate your unused gold. Gold you're not using, please give it to us. And you can see these people have come to give gold to the government. And I think this is kind of a public relations picture. I mean, I think this is a Korean actress. But here's the thing that I think is really striking. Look at this. These, I think, are much more clearly just your average everyday people. It's mostly housewives who are going to do this in this time period, right? It was going to be the middle-aged women whose duty it was to actually donate the gold. But they're lined up to give away gold to help the country pay its loan off and help the economy. And it's a little bit hard to read all this. It's kind of a blurry photo, but it says basically gather gold. I can't read what this says, but it's this is gold. Gather gold to revive the nation's economy. And you got people literally lined up to donate gold. And so because of this, Korea could was able to raise money quicker and pay its loans off early, helping them to revive their economy more quickly. That's the power of nationalism, right? Whatever happens to my nation affects me. I owe my nation for all the good things I enjoy in my life. I'm going to sacrifice. I'm going to give up my gold for free, give it to the government to make our country better. That gives you a lot of power.